The $50,000 crystal chandelier crashed to the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. Arthur Pemberton stood frozen in his $8,000 Savile Row suit, champagne dripping from his perfectly styled hair, watching his empire crumble in real time on the wall of monitors before him. "Sir, the board is demanding your immediate resignation," his assistant Vincent stammered, his designer glasses fogging up with nervous perspiration. "The leaked footage of you calling employees glorified hamsters on wheels has broken the internet. Our stock just dropped 40% in 20 minutes. Arthur's emerald eyes narrowed as he watched the viral video loop endlessly across every news channel. There he was, caught on hidden camera during what he thought was a private executive meeting, dismissing his 4,000 employees as interchangeable cogs who should be grateful I even pay them minimum wage. 32 years building Pemberton Industries, he muttered, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. From a single restaurant to a hospitality empire spanning 3 continents, and one leaked video threatens to destroy everything because some bleeding heart intern thought they were a whistleblower. The irony tasted more bitter than the champagne now staining his Italian leather shoes. The man who owned luxury hotels in Paris, casinos in Monaco, and restaurants in every major city was now facing the one thing money couldn't buy: forgiveness. Meanwhile, 23 floors below in the employee cafeteria of Pemberton Tower, Grace Martinez was having her own crisis, though considerably less expensive and infinitely more relatable. "No, no, no," Grace groaned, staring at the coffee machine that had just devoured her last $5 without dispensing a single drop of caffeine. Her wild curls had escaped their ponytail during her sprint from the subway, and her bargain store blazer was slightly wrinkled from being pressed between her mattress and box spring the night before. "Having a moment with Mr. Cappuccino again?" laughed her colleague Daniela, bouncing over with the energy of someone who'd actually managed to get coffee that morning. "This machine is like my love life. It takes my money and gives me nothing in return," Grace replied, giving the machine a frustrated kick that somehow made it whir to life and dispense perfect espresso. "Maybe you just needed to show it who's boss," Daniela grinned. "Speaking of bosses, have you seen the news about Mr. Pemberton? The man's career just went from penthouse to outhouse in record time." Grace glanced at the break room TV where Arthur's face filled the screen, looking every inch the stereotypical corporate villain. "You know what? Good. Maybe now someone who actually cares about people will run this place. Do you know he's never even set foot in the employee areas? 32 years owning this building and he's never once visited the floors where actual work happens." What Grace didn't know was that Arthur was at that very moment having an epiphany that would change both their lives forever. Back in the penthouse, Arthur was staring at a photograph on his desk. Not of family, he had none that mattered, but of his very first restaurant, a tiny place in Queens where he'd served every customer personally, knew every employee's name, and actually understood what it meant to work for a living. "Vincent, what if the problem isn't the leak?" Arthur said suddenly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge of inspiration. "What if the problem is that the leak was accurate?" Vincent's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his receding hairline. "Sir, surely you're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that maybe, just maybe, I've become exactly the kind of boss I swore I'd never be when I started this company." Arthur began pacing, his movements sharp and decisive. "Sun Tzu said to know your enemy, but what if the enemy is my own ignorance? What if I've been so far removed from the actual business of running a business that I've forgotten what makes it work?" "You're speaking in riddles, sir." "I'm speaking in solutions." Arthur stopped at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city that had made him rich but apparently cost him his humanity. "I'm going undercover, Vincent. Into my own company." The silence that followed was so complete that the sound of Grace's laughter echoing up from 23 floors below through the building's ventilation system seemed to fill the room like music. "Sir, you cannot be serious. You, Arthur Pemberton, working alongside regular people?" Vincent's voice cracked as if he'd suggested Arthur take up professional wrestling. "Not alongside them, Vincent. As one of them." Arthur turned from the window, and for the first time in decades there was something other than calculating ambition in his expression. There was genuine curiosity. I'm going to discover what it's really like to work for Arthur Pemberton. And maybe, just maybe, I'll figure out how to save my company and possibly my soul in the process. But sir, you don't know the first thing about being ordinary. Arthur's laugh was sharp and self-aware. Then it's time I learned. Because right now, ordinary people are the only ones who can save me from being extraordinary at being terrible. The decision hung in the air like expensive cologne, intoxicating, slightly dangerous, and completely life-changing. Arthur Pemberton, the man who had never worked a day in his life for anyone but himself, was about to discover what it meant to be human. What he didn't know was that his greatest teacher wouldn't be humility or hard work. It would be a whip-smart, coffee-addicted, absolutely magnificent woman named Grace Martinez, who was about to turn his carefully constructed world into the most beautiful chaos he'd ever experienced. But that revelation was still 48 hours and one spectacularly awful disguise away. As Arthur began planning his descent into the real world, Grace was finishing her shift, completely unaware that her life was about to intersect with a man who would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, work, and the possibility of finding both in the most unexpected places. The stage was set for the greatest performance of Arthur Pemberton's life, and the greatest love story of both their lives. 48 hours later, Arthur Pemberton stood in front of his walk-in closet, a space larger than most studio apartments, staring at the most challenging puzzle of his life. How to look poor. Vincent, does this say struggling employee to you? Arthur emerged wearing a polo shirt that still had its $300 price tag dangling from the sleeve. Vincent, who had spent the morning researching common people attire on Google, squinted critically. Sir, I believe regular people don't typically wear shirts that cost more than their monthly rent. Right, more common. Arthur disappeared back into the closet, emerging minutes later in what he believed was the perfect disguise. Designer jeans, only $150, a button-down shirt from Nordstrom, a bargain at $89, and sneakers that he'd specifically chosen for being only $200. How's this? I look absolutely poverty-stricken, don't I? Vincent bit his lip. Sir, you look like you're cosplaying as a person who shops at Target, but exclusively at their most expensive section. The transformation was more complex than Arthur had anticipated. His manicured hands had never known calluses, his posture screamed private school, and his vocabulary was peppered with words like perchance and indubitably, not exactly common cafeteria conversation. Vincent, I need a complete identity. Background, family, reason for working at my own company. Perhaps Arthur Smith? Vincent suggested weakly. Too obvious, make it Artie Sullivan. Yes, that sounds sufficiently pedestrian. Meanwhile, Grace was arriving at Pemberton Tower for another day, in what she cheerfully called corporate purgatory. Her morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency, subway card balanced on her phone, coffee from the bodega on the corner, because the office machine was both expensive and vindictive, and exactly 7 minutes to make it from the lobby to her desk before her supervisor Marcus noticed. Grace, thank goodness you're here. Daniela rushed over, her usually perfect composure slightly frazzled. We're getting a new guy today in our department, and Marcus is in one of his moods. Apparently the new hire is some kind of special assignment from upper management. Grace rolled her eyes while powering up her ancient computer. Let me guess. Another executive's nephew who needs to understand the business from the ground up before Daddy gives him a VP position? Actually, the weird thing is, nobody knows anything about him. Just that his name is Artie Sullivan. He's starting today, and Marcus received direct orders to treat him like any other employee. At precisely 9 a.m. the elevator dinged, and Arthur, now Artie, stepped onto the 15th floor for the first time in his life. The contrast was jarring. Where his penthouse was all marble and gold, this floor was a maze of gray cubicles, humming fluorescent lights, and the faint aroma of reheated leftovers. You must be Sullivan. Marcus approached with the enthusiasm of someone announcing a root canal. I'm Marcus Chen, department supervisor. You'll be working in customer relations, handling complaints and general inquiries. Arthur's eye twitched. Customer relations? He'd never spoken to a customer who wasn't praising him at a 500 per plate charity dinner. "Wonderful," Arthur managed, his voice cracking slightly on the word. "I'm absolutely thrilled to be here among the people." Marcus's eyebrows knitted together. "Right. Well, Grace Martinez will show you the ropes." "Grace?" Grace looked up from her computer, and for a moment, time seemed to suspend itself in the fluorescent-lit office space. Arthur felt something he'd never experienced before. Not the thrill of closing a billion-dollar deal, not the satisfaction of crushing a competitor, but something warmer and infinitely more dangerous. Grace saw a tall man with striking green eyes who looked like he'd never been within 50 feet of a thrift store, despite clearly trying to dress like he shopped at one. His posture was too straight, his smile too practiced, and his handshake too firm. But there was something vulnerable in his expression that caught her completely off guard. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "Grace Martinez. Welcome to the trenches." "Artie Sullivan," he replied, and when their hands touched, he forgot every single lesson Vincent had given him about acting normal. "I'm delighted to make your acquaintance." Grace blinked. "Delighted? Who says delighted?" Arthur's brain scrambled. "I mean, hey, girl. What's happening?" The awkward silence that followed was broken by Grace's laughter, not mocking, but genuinely amused. "Okay, Artie Sullivan, let me guess. You're either the world's most polite person or you've never worked in customer service before." "The latter," Arthur admitted, then quickly added, "I mean, I've worked in other industries." "Let me show you your desk," Grace said, leading him to a cubicle that was smaller than Arthur's bathroom. "Fair warning, the computer is from approximately 2015. The phone sounds like it's underwater, and if you're nice to the coffee machine, sometimes it doesn't steal your money." As Grace explained the intricacies of their customer database, Arthur found himself genuinely fascinated, not by the systems, but by her. She spoke with her hands, made jokes to ease the monotony, and had a way of making even the most mundane tasks sound like adventures. So when Mrs. Henderson calls, and she will call probably around 2 p.m., she's going to complain about the air conditioning in the downtown hotel restaurant. She calls every Tuesday. Just listen, agree that air conditioning is very important, and transfer her to maintenance. Every Tuesday? Arthur was incredulous. Why doesn't someone fix the air conditioning? Grace gave him a look that somehow managed to be both patient and pitying. Oh, sweet summer child. Because that would cost money, and spending money on customer comfort isn't exactly this company's strong suit. Arthur felt an uncomfortable twist in his stomach. Surely the management cares about customer satisfaction. The management cares about profit margins. Customer satisfaction is just a happy accident. Grace's tone carried years of resigned experience. You'll learn that Arthur Pemberton, our beloved CEO, hasn't set foot in the real world since probably 1995. The irony was so thick Arthur could have spread it on toast. Here he was, receiving a brutally honest performance review from someone who had no idea she was talking to her subject. What if someone could change things? Arthur asked carefully. Grace's laugh was both bitter and beautiful. Change things? Artie, the man literally called us hamsters on wheels on national television. The only thing that's going to change is probably our jobs. Straight into unemployment. Arthur spent the rest of the morning learning the complex art of being ordinary. He discovered that lunch wasn't a catered affair in a private dining room, but rather a rushed 20-minute affair with reheated leftovers eaten at one's desk. He learned that bathroom breaks were timed, that personal phone calls were forbidden, and that the phrase, "that's above my pay grade," was both a survival mechanism and a way of life. But most importantly, he learned that Grace Martinez was extraordinary. She handled difficult customers with the patience of a saint and the wit of a comedian. She knew everyone's names, remembered their birthdays, and somehow managed to maintain her humanity in an environment designed to strip it away. She was everything Arthur had never realized he was looking for, and everything his company had failed to value. By lunch, Arthur was exhausted, humbled, and completely, utterly smitten. "So, Artie," Grace said as they sat in the break room sharing vending machine snacks, "what's your story? What brings you to our little corner of corporate America?" Arthur looked into her warm brown eyes and realized that for the first time in his life, he wanted to tell someone the truth, not the careful, calculated version he presented to boards and investors, but the real, messy, vulnerable truth. Instead, he said, "I guess I just wanted to do something meaningful." Grace smiled, and Arthur felt his carefully constructed world shift on its axis. "Well, Artie Sullivan, you've definitely come to the right place. We specialize in finding meaning in the meaningless around here." As they sat there, sharing a bag of overpriced chips and talking about everything and nothing, Arthur realized that his mission to understand his employees had become something infinitely more complicated. He was falling in love with one of them, and she had absolutely no idea who he really was. Day 3 of Arthur's transformation into Artie Sullivan began with what he would later describe to Vincent as the most terrifying 45 minutes of my adult life, his first solo customer service call. "Pemberton Industries Customer Relations, this is Artie speaking. How may I assist you today?" Arthur's voice carried the same tone he used for addressing the United Nations Economic Council. "Assist me?" The voice on the other end exploded like a verbal grenade. "I'll tell you how you can assist me. I've been on hold for 37 minutes listening to the same jazzy saxophone solo, and I want to speak to someone who actually has a functioning brain cell." Arthur held the phone away from his ear, staring at it as if it had personally insulted his mother. In 32 years of business, no one had ever shouted at Arthur Pemberton. People whispered respectfully in his presence, asked permission to speak, and thanked him profusely for his time. "Sir, I understand your frustration." "No, you don't understand anything. My wedding reception is tomorrow at your downtown hotel, and your catering department just informed me that they've lost my order. Lost it. Do you have any idea what that means?" Arthur genuinely didn't. His own wedding had been a $2 million affair orchestrated by teams of professionals. The concept of lost orders was as foreign to him as space travel. Perhaps we could relocate your order?" Arthur suggested weakly. The silence on the other end was more frightening than the shouting. "Did you just suggest we relocate a catering order? Like it's hiding behind the couch?" Grace, who had been listening to this disaster unfold from the neighboring cubicle, quickly scribbled a note and slid it across. "Ask for the order number, check the backup system, offer compensation, and transfer to management." Arthur stared at the note like it was written in hieroglyphics. Could you spell that more slowly?" "Spell what more slowly?" The thing you want me to do?" Grace closed her eyes, took 3 deep breaths, and performed what Arthur would later recognize as an act of professional heroism. She rolled her chair over to his cubicle, mouthed, put it on speaker, and began conducting Arthur through the call like a patient orchestra conductor. 20 minutes later, the crisis was resolved. The customer was happy, and Arthur was staring at Grace with the expression of a man who had just witnessed a miracle. "How did you do that?" he breathed. "You turned a screaming human into someone who thanked us. It's called customer service, Artie. You listen, you empathize, you solve problems, and you remember that behind every complaint is a person having a bad day." Grace's smile was both amused and gentle. "You'll get the hang of it. But where did you learn to be so diplomatic?" Grace laughed, a sound that was becoming Arthur's favorite melody. 6 years of working here, plus growing up with 4 brothers and a mother who ran a daycare. If you can negotiate peace between 12 toddlers fighting over finger paints, angry customers are easy. Arthur found himself genuinely curious about this woman's life in a way he'd never been curious about anyone before. "Tell me about your family." "Why? You writing a book?" Grace teased, but she was charmed by his interest. Most people at work barely knew each other's last names. I find you fascinating," Arthur said honestly, then immediately worried he'd been too forward. Grace felt a flutter in her chest that she hadn't experienced in months. There was something about Artie Sullivan that didn't quite add up. His vocabulary, his posture, the way he looked at everyday situations like they were exotic adventures. But there was also something genuinely sweet about him. Well, if you must know, I'm the oldest of 5 kids. My parents immigrated from El Salvador when I was 3. Dad works construction, Mom cleans offices downtown. My brothers think I'm crazy for staying in school and working full-time, but someone has to be the responsible one. She paused, then added with a grin. Plus, I have this ridiculous dream of starting my own business someday. What kind of business? Arthur leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. Community center with a cafe. Somewhere people can come for job training, language classes, small business workshops. Basically everything my neighborhood needs but can't afford. Grace's eyes lit up as she spoke. I know it sounds impossible, but I've been saving every penny for 3 years. Arthur felt something crack inside his chest. Here was someone with a dream that was selfless, practical, and beautiful, everything his own ambitions had never been. That doesn't sound impossible at all, he said softly. It sounds incredible. Their moment was interrupted by Marcus appearing at Arthur's cubicle like a bad omen in a cheap suit. Sullivan, I need to see you in my office. Now. Grace shot Arthur a sympathetic look that roughly translated to nice knowing you. Marcus's office was a testament to middle management mediocrity, motivational posters about teamwork and synergy, a desk covered in forms that seemed to serve no purpose, and the lingering aroma of microwaved fish. Sullivan, we need to talk about your performance. Arthur's stomach dropped. In his entire life, no one had ever questioned his performance at anything. I've been monitoring your calls, and frankly, I'm concerned. Your approach is unusual. Unusual how? Arthur tried to keep his voice steady. Well, for starters, you spent 43 minutes on a call that should have taken 10. Company policy is to handle complaints quickly and move on. Time is money. Arthur blinked. But we solved the customer's problem. They were happy when they hung up. Happy customers don't pay the bills, Sullivan. Efficient call times do. Marcus leaned back in his chair with the authority of someone who had never built anything but was very good at maintaining the status quo. We have quotas to meet, metrics to track. Customer satisfaction is secondary to call volume. Arthur felt a surge of something he'd never experienced before, righteous anger on behalf of someone else. But if we don't solve their problems, they'll just call back, won't they? Isn't it more efficient to handle things properly the first time? Marcus's smile was condescending enough to power a small city. Sullivan, I can see you're new to the corporate world. Let me explain something. We don't get paid to think. We get paid to follow procedures. The thinking is done by people much higher up the food chain than us. Arthur had to physically bite his tongue to keep from saying, I am the food chain. Now I'm going to pair you with Grace for the rest of the week. She'll show you how to handle calls efficiently. Try to keep up. Walking back to his cubicle, Arthur felt like he was seeing his company, his life's work, through completely new eyes. Every policy that had seemed logical from the boardroom felt cruel and short-sighted from the floor. How did it go? Grace asked, as he slumped into his chair. I think I'm beginning to understand why people hate Arthur Pemberton, he said without thinking. Grace raised an eyebrow. That's oddly specific. Most people just say management or corporate. Why Arthur Pemberton specifically? Arthur's brain scrambled for a recovery. I saw him on the news. He seems like exactly the kind of person who would create policies that prioritize efficiency over humanity. You're not wrong, Grace said, her voice carrying years of frustration. You know what the worst part is? This company could be amazing. We have incredible people, loyal customers, and enough resources to actually make a difference. But instead of empowering employees to solve problems, management treats us like we're too stupid to think for ourselves. As Arthur listened to Grace describe her vision for what Pemberton Industries could become, he realized that somewhere in his climb to the top, he had forgotten what it felt like to be at the bottom. He had become so focused on profits and market share that he had lost sight of the people who made it all possible. But more than that, he was falling deeper in love with a woman who saw potential where he had seen only problems, who found hope where he had created despair, That evening, as Arthur sat in his penthouse reviewing reports, he called Vincent. "Vincent, I need you to pull all the customer satisfaction surveys from the past year." "Sir, those are usually handled by the marketing department." "Pull them anyway. And I want exit interview reports from every employee who quit in the past 6 months." "Sir, if I may ask, what exactly are you looking for?" Arthur stared out at the city lights, thinking about Grace's dream of a community center, about the customer whose wedding he had almost ruined, about Marcus's soulless approach to human interaction. "I'm looking for the truth, Vincent. And I think I'm finally ready to see it." 2 weeks into his double life, Arthur Pemberton was living in a constant state of beautiful chaos. By day, he was Artie Sullivan, fumbling through customer service calls, eating sad desk salads, and discovering that Casual Friday meant something entirely different to people who actually shopped at regular stores. By night, he was secretly revolutionizing his own company, one anonymous policy change at a time. "Vincent, I need you to send a memo from upper management to all department heads," Arthur said during one of their clandestine midnight meetings. "Effective immediately, customer service representatives will be evaluated on customer satisfaction scores, not call volume." Vincent looked up from his tablet with the expression of someone watching his boss lose his mind in real time. "Sir, that will reduce efficiency by at least 30%. "Good. Efficiency without effectiveness is just organized failure." Arthur was pacing his penthouse with the energy of a man who had discovered a new religion. "Also, I want you to, anonymously, increase the customer service department's budget by 50%. New computers, better phones, and for the love of all that's holy, fix that coffee machine. Sir, the board will demand explanations for these expenditures. Tell them it's a pilot program for employee engagement optimization." They love buzzwords that sound expensive. Arthur paused at his window, looking down at the building where Grace was probably getting ready for another day of dealing with his company's systemic problems. "And Vincent? I want you to research community development grants, specifically funding for neighborhood centers that offer job training and small business support." Vincent's stylus froze mid-note. "Sir, are you feeling quite well?" Arthur's smile was the expression of a man who had never felt better in his life. "I'm feeling human, Vincent. It's terrifying and wonderful." Meanwhile, Grace was having her own moment of confusion as she arrived at work to discover that their entire floor had been transformed overnight. Gone were the ancient computers that sounded like dying robots. In their place were sleek new machines that actually started when you pressed the power button. The phones no longer sounded like they were transmitting from underwater, and, most miraculous of all, the coffee machine had been replaced with a fancy model that dispensed actual coffee instead of brown-colored disappointment. "Okay, what parallel universe did we wake up in?" Daniela asked, staring at her new computer screen with the wonderment of someone seeing fire for the first time. "Maybe someone finally listened to our complaints?" Grace suggested, though she sounded as skeptical as she felt. "Grace, honey, I've been working here for 8 years. They don't listen to our complaints. They barely acknowledge our existence." Daniela typed tentatively on her new keyboard as if it might disappear if she touched it too enthusiastically. "This feels like a glitch in the Matrix." Arthur, now fully committed to his arty persona in clothes that had cost him a humbling trip to an actual discount store, arrived to find Grace staring suspiciously at the new equipment. "Morning, Grace. Nice upgrades, huh?" He tried to sound casually surprised rather than like someone who had personally approved every purchase order. "It's weird, Artie. In 6 years of working here, the most exciting upgrade we've gotten was when they replaced the water cooler with a slightly less broken water cooler." Grace turned to him with those expressive brown eyes that had become the highlight of his days. Something's not right. Arthur felt a flutter of panic. Had he been too obvious? Too generous? Maybe the company's finally realizing that happy employees are productive employees? Grace's laugh was rich with skepticism. Arthur Pemberton realizing something about employee happiness? That man wouldn't recognize job satisfaction if it performed a musical number on his desk. The irony was becoming so thick that Arthur was surprised Grace couldn't see it floating around him like a fog. "You really don't think people can change?" "I think people can change," Grace said thoughtfully. settling into her new ergonomic chair with obvious delight. But I think corporations are like giant ships. They change direction very, very slowly. And Arthur Pemberton strikes me as the kind of person who would rather sink the ship than admit he was steering it wrong. Arthur felt both stung and motivated by her assessment. What if he's not as bad as everyone thinks? Grace gave him a look that was part amusement, part concern. Artie, did you hit your head on the way in? The man literally called us hamsters, on television. To the entire world. But what if that was taken out of context? What if he's actually trying to? Are you seriously defending Arthur Pemberton right now? Grace's eyebrows had climbed so high they were practically in her hairline. Did they replace you with a pod person along with our computers? Arthur realized he was walking into dangerous territory. I just think maybe we shouldn't judge people based on one bad moment. One bad moment? Grace swiveled her chair to face him fully. Artie, this isn't one bad moment. This is a pattern. Low wages, impossible quotas, treating employees like they're disposable. That doesn't happen by accident. As Grace listed his failures as a leader, Arthur felt each criticism like a physical blow, but instead of the defensive anger he might have felt 2 weeks ago, he felt something else: shame, and a desperate desire to be worthy of this extraordinary woman's respect. You're right, he said quietly. I guess I want to believe that people can be better than their worst moments. Something in his tone made Grace look at him more carefully. There was a vulnerability in Artie Sullivan that she found increasingly compelling. That's very sweet, Artie. And optimistic. Are you sure you're cut out for corporate America? Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus strutting over with the self-important air of a man who had just been given news that made him feel powerful. Team meeting, everyone. I've just received some very interesting directives from upper management. Marcus was practically vibrating with authority. Apparently, we're part of a new pilot program for customer satisfaction optimization. Grace and Arthur exchanged glances, hers confused, his carefully neutral. What does that mean exactly? Asked Daniela. It means, Marcus announced with the drama of someone revealing the location of buried treasure, that starting today, we're being evaluated on customer satisfaction scores instead of call volume, and our budget for training and equipment has been significantly increased. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Arthur watched Grace's face transform from skepticism to cautious hope to genuine excitement. Are you serious? Grace asked. We can actually take the time to solve problems instead of just transferring them? That's what the memo says. Apparently, someone very high up has decided that customer service should actually focus on serving customers. Marcus delivered this news as if it were a revolutionary concept instead of basic business sense. Arthur felt a warmth spread through his chest as he watched Grace's professional excitement. This was what she was meant to do: solve problems, help people, make connections. It was beautiful to watch. Over the next few hours, Arthur observed a transformation in the entire department. Without the pressure of rushing through calls, employees took the time to actually listen to customers. Problems were solved instead of transferred. People smiled more, complained less, and even Marcus seemed marginally less unbearable. But the real magic happened during lunch, when Grace pulled Arthur aside. I don't know what's happening, but I love it, she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Mrs. Henderson called today. You know, the Tuesday air conditioning lady? Instead of just transferring her, I actually called the maintenance department myself. Turns out the problem wasn't the air conditioning at all. The restaurant's been seating her at a table directly under a heating vent. One simple table change, and a 6-month problem is solved. Arthur felt like his heart might explode with pride. That's incredible, Grace. It gets better. She was so happy that she asked to speak to my supervisor to give me a compliment. When's the last time Marcus received a call to praise an employee instead of complain about one? Arthur realized that in 32 years of running his company, he had never once received a call praising an individual employee. He had created systems that captured complaints and tracked failures, but never thought to measure or celebrate successes at the human level. You're amazing, he said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. Grace felt her cheeks warm. I'm just doing my job, Artie. No, you're not. You're doing your job extraordinarily well, but more than that, you're the kind of person who makes everything around you better. Arthur's voice was soft with sincerity. I've never met anyone like you. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility and the kind of tension that makes ordinary office fluorescent lighting feel romantic. Artie, Grace said quietly, would you like to get coffee sometime? Real coffee, not the office stuff. Maybe we could talk? Arthur's heart performed what felt like a complete gymnastics routine. I would love that more than anything. As they made plans for their first real date, Arthur realized that he was falling in love with two things simultaneously: Grace Martinez and the person he was becoming because of her. She was teaching him to see his company, his employees, and himself through new eyes. But with every passing day, the weight of his deception grew heavier. He was building something beautiful with Grace, but it was built on a foundation of lies. Soon, he would have to choose between his secret and his heart. And Arthur Pemberton, who had always been good at making difficult business decisions, had no idea how to navigate the most important choice of his life. Arthur spent 47 minutes standing in front of his closet, holding what Vincent had assured him was an appropriately middle-class sweater, while having what could only be described as an existential crisis about knitwear. Vincent, does this say I'm a normal person who works in customer service? Or does it say I'm a millionaire pretending to understand cotton blends? Vincent, who had been researching affordable date locations with the intensity of a doctoral thesis, looked up from his tablet. Sir, it's a sweater from Target. I believe it's as normal as clothing can be. But what if she notices it's new? What if she asks where I bought it? What if she can smell the money on me? Arthur was spiraling in a way that would have been comical if it weren't so genuine. Sir, with respect, I think you're overthinking this. Arthur paused in his pacing. Vincent, I'm about to go on a date with a woman who thinks I make $35,000 a year and live in a studio apartment. She has no idea that I could buy the coffee shop we're meeting at, the entire block it's on, and probably the coffee plantation that supplies their beans. How exactly does one underthink that situation? An hour later, Arthur stood outside Beans and Dreams, a cozy neighborhood coffee shop that Grace had suggested because their coffee doesn't cost more than most people's hourly wage. The irony that Arthur regularly spent more on a single bottle of wine than Grace made in a week was not lost on him. Grace arrived exactly on time, wearing a sundress that looked like it had come from a thrift store, but somehow made her look more beautiful than any woman Arthur had ever seen in couture. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she carried a worn leather purse that had clearly seen better days, but was maintained with obvious care. Hi, she said, and Arthur forgot every carefully rehearsed normal person conversation starter Vincent had prepared for him. You look stunning, he managed, then immediately worried that stunning was too fancy a word for Artie Sullivan's vocabulary. Grace smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. Thank you. You clean up pretty well yourself, Artie Sullivan. The coffee shop was everything Arthur's usual haunts were not. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, a menu written on a chalkboard, and the kind of comfortable chaos that comes from being a genuine community gathering place rather than a carefully curated experience. 2 coffees, please, Arthur said to the barista, then turned to Grace. What would you like? Surprise me, Grace said, then watched in amusement as Arthur stared at the menu like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. The truth was, Arthur had never ordered coffee for himself in his life. His assistant brought him precisely calibrated espresso drinks from a private cafe that cost more per cup than most people spent on groceries in a day. 2. Coffee. Coffees? Arthur said to the barista, who looked like she was witnessing someone order oxygen. Grace stepped in smoothly. He'll have a medium dark roast with cream, and I'll have a cappuccino with an extra shot, please. As they settled into a corner table with furniture that was comfortable rather than expensive, Arthur realized he was about to have the most important conversation of his life, and he had no idea how to begin. So, Grace said, warming her hands around her mug, tell me about yourself, Artie. The real stuff, not the work stuff. Arthur's mind went completely blank. The real stuff? His real life involved board meetings, private jets, and deciding the fates of thousands of employees before breakfast. His hobbies included collecting rare wines, attending charity galas where he was the guest of honor, and playing golf at clubs that required recommendation letters from other millionaires. I like to read, he said finally, which was technically true, though his reading mostly consisted of financial reports and market analyses. What kind of books? Grace leaned forward, genuinely interested. Arthur panicked. What did normal people read? Books with words? Grace laughed, not mockingly but with genuine delight. Books with words. Well, that narrows it down to most of literature. You're funny, Artie. Encouraged by her laughter, Arthur relaxed slightly. What about you? What do you do when you're not saving me from customer service disasters? I volunteer at a community center downtown on weekends, teaching computer skills to adults who are trying to get back into the workforce. Grace's face lit up as she spoke. It's amazing what happens when people get a second chance, you know? Last month, Maria, she's 53 and has been out of work for 2 years, got hired at a bank because she learned Excel in our program. Arthur felt that familiar squeeze in his chest. That's incredible. You're changing people's lives. We all have skills, Artie. Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us and give us the tools to use them. Grace took a sip of her cappuccino. That's why I want to open my own center someday. Bigger space, more programs, maybe even small business incubators. Tell me more about that, Arthur said, and realized he had never been more genuinely interested in anything in his life. For the next hour, Grace painted a picture of her dream, a place where people could learn job skills, get help with resumes, attend financial literacy classes, and access small business loans. She talked about partnerships with local schools, job placement programs, and creating a sense of community in a neighborhood that had been overlooked by economic development. Arthur found himself taking mental notes, not as a businessman evaluating an opportunity, but as a man falling in love with a woman's vision of making the world better. It sounds like you've thought of everything, he said. I've had a lot of time to think about it. 6 years of saving every extra penny gives you plenty of time to plan. Grace's smile was rueful. At my current rate of saving, I should be able to afford the down payment on a space sometime around my 60th birthday. Arthur's heart clenched. This woman, who had more vision and compassion in her little finger than he had developed in 32 years, was constrained by the very economic system he had mastered. What if someone wanted to invest in your idea? He asked carefully. Grace's laugh was slightly bitter. Artie, people don't invest in community centers in my neighborhood. There's no profit in helping people who don't have money. But what if they did? What if someone saw the value in what you're trying to do? Grace studied his face, noting the intensity in his expression. You really believe in this, don't you? I believe in you, Arthur said, and realized it was the most honest thing he had said in weeks. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility and emotion. Grace felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that this man, this sweet, awkward, slightly mysterious man, was something special. Artie, she said softly, can I ask you something? Arthur's heart rate spiked. Anything. Where are you really from? I mean, you have this way of talking sometimes, like you're not used to, I don't know, regular life? And today, when you ordered coffee, it was like you'd never been in a coffee shop before. Arthur felt the weight of his deception like a physical pressure. Here was his chance to tell her the truth, to reveal who he really was and hope that what they had built together was strong enough to survive the revelation. Instead, he heard himself say, I grew up differently than most people. Private schools, sheltered family. I'm still learning how to be normal. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the truth either, and Arthur hated himself for the compromise. Grace nodded, as if this explained the contradictions she had noticed. That makes sense. Well, I like your version of normal, even if it includes ordering coffees. They talked until the coffee shop began filling with the dinner crowd, about everything and nothing. Grace told stories about her family, Her brothers, who were convinced she was crazy for working so hard. Her parents, who were proud but worried about her dreams being too big. Arthur found himself sharing carefully edited versions of his own stories. His loneliness, his sense that he had been successful in business but unsuccessful in life, his growing realization that money couldn't buy the things that actually mattered. As they prepared to leave, Grace hesitated at the door. "Artie, I had a really wonderful time today." "So did I. More wonderful than I can express." Grace looked up at him, noting the way the evening light caught in his green eyes, the sincerity in his expression. "Would you like to do this again sometime?" Arthur felt like his heart might actually stop. Yes, more than anything. As they stood on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, the space between them charged with possibility, Arthur realized that he was at a crossroads. He could continue this beautiful charade, building a relationship on a foundation of lies, or he could find the courage to tell Grace the truth and risk losing the best thing that had ever happened to him. "Grace," he said, his voice carrying a weight that made her look at him more carefully. "Yes?" Arthur looked into her warm brown eyes, saw the trust and growing affection there, and felt his courage fail him. "I'll see you Monday at work," he said instead. Grace smiled and stood on her tiptoes to kiss his cheek, a gesture so simple and sweet that it nearly undid him completely. "See you Monday, Artie Sullivan." As Arthur watched her walk away, disappearing into the evening crowd, he realized that he was no longer just pretending to be someone else. He was becoming someone else, someone better, someone worthy of Grace Martinez's affection. But he was also digging himself deeper into a deception that would eventually destroy everything beautiful they were building together. The question was no longer whether to tell her the truth, but whether he would find the courage to do it before it was too late. 3 weeks after their perfect coffee date, Arthur's carefully constructed double life was about to implode in the most spectacular way possible. It began, as most disasters do, with the best of intentions and the worst possible timing. Grace was having the kind of morning that made her believe in magic. The new customer service protocols were working beautifully, employee morale was at an all-time high, and she had just received news that made her heart soar. An anonymous donor had contacted the community center where she volunteered, offering to fund a major expansion of their programs. "Artie, you'll never believe what happened." Grace practically bounced over to his cubicle, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Someone wants to donate $500,000 to expand our community center. Can you believe it? $500,000. Arthur nearly choked on his coffee. The anonymous donation had been his idea, a way to support Grace's dream without revealing his identity. He had instructed Vincent to handle it through a series of shell companies and intermediaries. That's incredible, Grace," he managed, his voice slightly strangled. "I know. They want to meet with our board next week to discuss the details. The donor requested complete anonymity, but apparently they've been following our work for weeks." Grace was glowing with happiness. "Artie, this means everything. We can finally offer job training, small business workshops, even childcare so parents can attend classes. It's like someone read my mind and decided to make my dreams come true." Arthur felt his heart swell with joy and terror in equal measure. Seeing Grace this happy was worth any amount of money, but the web of lies was becoming impossible to maintain. "Grace, that's wonderful. You deserve this," he said, meaning every word. "I keep wondering who would do something like this. Someone who really understands what we're trying to accomplish, you know? Someone who sees the potential for real change." Grace paused, studying Arthur's face. "You've been so supportive of the idea. I almost wish it could be someone like you." Arthur's mouth went dry. "Someone like me? Someone who believes in building people up instead of treating them like numbers on a spreadsheet. Someone who understands that real success means lifting others up with you." Grace's voice was soft with affection. "You're special, Artie Sullivan. I hope you know that." As Grace returned to her desk, Arthur sat frozen, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he had set in motion. He was living 2 lives that were becoming impossible to reconcile, and the woman he loved was falling for both versions of him without knowing they were the same person. The universe, however, was about to make the choice for him. At precisely 2:47 p.m., Vincent appeared on the 15th floor looking like a man who had just witnessed the apocalypse. "Sir," he whispered urgently to Arthur, "we have a situation. Channel 7 News is in the lobby. They're here to do a follow-up story on employee morale improvements at Pemberton Industries." Arthur's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Apparently, word leaked about the recent changes in the customer service department. They want to interview employees about their experience with the new policies." Vincent's voice was barely audible. "They're asking for you specifically." "For Artie Sullivan?" "No, sir. For Arthur Pemberton. They want to know if the CEO has any comment on the dramatic improvements in employee satisfaction." Arthur felt the world tilt on its axis. In less than 10 minutes, his two worlds were going to collide in the most public way possible. "Vincent, get them out of here. Reschedule, cancel, anything." "I tried, sir. They're already in the elevator." The elevator dinged, and Arthur watched in horror as a news crew emerged onto his floor, followed by Marcus, who was practically vibrating with excitement at being on television. "Ladies and gentlemen," the reporter announced to the camera, "we're here at Pemberton Industries, where dramatic policy changes have reportedly transformed the workplace culture. We're hoping to speak with some employees about their experiences." Grace looked up from her desk, curious about the commotion. Arthur frantically tried to make himself invisible behind his computer monitor, but it was too late. "Excuse me," the reporter approached Grace's desk. "I'm Rebecca Chen from Channel 7 News. We're doing a story about recent improvements in working conditions here. Would you be willing to share your experience?" Grace, ever articulate and passionate about her work, stood up with confidence. "I'd be happy to. The changes have been incredible. For the first time in years, we feel like the company actually values our contributions." "Can you give us specifics?" "Well, we have new equipment, better policies that focus on actually helping customers instead of just processing them, and there's a sense that management finally understands what we do down here." Grace's enthusiasm was infectious. It's like someone in charge finally decided to listen to their employees. The reporter nodded encouragingly. "These changes seem to coincide with the public relations crisis following CEO Arthur Pemberton's controversial comments. Do you think this is genuine reform or just damage control?" Grace paused thoughtfully. "I think actions speak louder than words. Whoever made these decisions, whether it was Arthur Pemberton or someone else, they clearly understand that treating employees well is good business. I have to admit, I'm surprised it came from the top, but I'm not complaining about the results." Arthur felt a mixture of pride and terror. Grace was defending his reforms on live television, attributing them to leadership she didn't know was sitting 3 feet away from her. "Speaking of Arthur Pemberton," the reporter continued, "we understand he's not available for comment today. Do you have any message for your CEO?" Grace looked directly into the camera, her expression sincere and powerful. "I'd tell him thank you. And I'd tell him that this is what leadership looks like. Creating conditions where people can do their best work and take care of customers properly. If this is the real Arthur Pemberton, then maybe there's hope for corporate America after all." Arthur felt his heart break and soar simultaneously. Here was the woman he loved, publicly defending him to the world, not knowing she was talking about the man sitting behind her, desperately trying not to cry. But the universe wasn't finished with its dramatic timing. "Actually," the reporter said, "we've just received word that Arthur Pemberton has arrived in the building. Perhaps we can get that interview after all." Arthur's blood froze as he watched Vincent step off the elevator, looking like a man walking to his execution. Behind him, looking every inch the CEO in a $5,000 suit and power posture, was someone Arthur didn't immediately recognize. Then he realized Vincent had hired a body double. "Mr. Pemberton," the reporter called out, "could we have a word?" The fake Arthur Pemberton strode confidently toward the camera with the kind of corporate charm that Arthur had perfected over decades. He was good, almost too good. Grace turned to watch the interview, and Arthur saw her expression change from curiosity to confusion to something approaching recognition. "Mr. Pemberton," the reporter began, "your employees seem pleased with recent policy changes." Can you tell us about your management philosophy? The body double launched into a perfectly crafted response about synergistic employee optimization and stakeholder value maximization. Exactly the kind of corporate speak that Arthur himself might have used 3 weeks ago. But Arthur watched Grace's face and saw the exact moment she made the connection. Her head turned slowly, her eyes moving from the fake Arthur Pemberton to the real one sitting at his cubicle. She took in his expensive bone structure that no amount of Target clothing could disguise, his perfect posture, the way he held himself with unconscious authority. Their eyes met across the office floor, and Arthur saw the precise moment Grace Martinez realized that Artie Sullivan was Arthur Pemberton. The devastation in her expression hit him like a physical blow. Grace stood frozen for a moment that felt like eternity, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, betrayal, and finally, heartbreak. Without saying a word, she grabbed her purse and walked to the elevator, her dignity intact but her trust shattered. "Grace, wait," Arthur called out, abandoning all pretense as he chased after her. The entire office, including the news crew, turned to watch Arthur Pemberton, unmistakably, undeniably Arthur Pemberton, desperately pursuing a customer service representative toward the elevator. "Grace, please, let me explain." The elevator doors closed between them like a curtain falling on the final act of a tragedy. Arthur stood in front of the elevator, his carefully constructed masquerade finally and completely destroyed, facing a room full of employees who now realized their CEO had been working among them for weeks. The silence was deafening. "Well," said the reporter, breaking the tension, "this is certainly an unexpected development." 24 hours later, Grace sat in her small apartment, surrounded by news coverage of what the media was calling the CEO masquerade. Her phone had been ringing constantly, reporters wanting her story, friends offering support, Daniela checking on her emotional state. She had turned it all off and spent the day processing the impossible reality. The man she had fallen in love with was the same man she had spent years criticizing. Artie Sullivan, with his sweet awkwardness and genuine curiosity about her life, was Arthur Pemberton, the billionaire who had called her a hamster on national television. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt more was the question that kept circling through her mind. Had any of it been real? A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Grace considered ignoring it, but something made her look through the peephole. Arthur stood in the hallway looking nothing like the polished CEO or the carefully casual Artie. He looked like a man who had lost everything that mattered, holding a single envelope in his hands. Against her better judgment, Grace opened the door. "You have 5 minutes," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. "Grace, I know you have every right to hate me. I lied to you about who I was, and I understand why you can't trust me." Arthur's voice was raw with emotion. "But I need you to know that everything I told you about how I felt, everything between us, that was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced in my life." Grace stood in her doorway, arms crossed, beautiful and distant and completely justified in her anger. "You made me fall in love with a fiction, Arthur. How am I supposed to know what was real and what was performance?" "Because of this." Arthur held out the envelope. "I wrote this letter 3 days ago before any of this happened. I was planning to give it to you with the truth about who I am." Grace took the envelope with trembling hands and found a handwritten letter, not typed by an assistant, not crafted by a PR team, but written in Arthur's own hand. "Grace, I don't know how to tell you this, so I'm going to write it down and hope I find the courage to give this to you. My name isn't Artie Sullivan, it's Arthur Pemberton, and I'm the CEO of the company where we work. I know how this sounds. I know you'll think I was playing a game or conducting some kind of experiment, but I need you to understand. Meeting you, falling in love with you, becoming the man I am when I'm with you, none of that was planned or calculated or false. I came to the 15th floor to understand my employees, but you taught me to understand myself. You showed me what it means to care about work that matters, to fight for people who need someone in their corner, to dream about making the world better instead of just making money. I love you, Grace Martinez. Not as Arthur Pemberton, the CEO, and not as Artie Sullivan, the customer service representative, but as the man I've become because of you, Someone who finally understands that the most important business is the business of being human. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to spend the rest of my life earning it. All my love. Arthur Grace read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up, Arthur was still standing there, vulnerable and hopeful and terrified. "Why didn't you give this to me sooner?" she whispered. "Because I was a coward. Because I was afraid you'd choose to hate Arthur Pemberton instead of love whoever I was becoming." Grace was quiet for a long moment, and Arthur felt his heart breaking with each second of silence. "Grace, I've done something else. Something I should have told you about." Arthur's voice was barely audible. "The anonymous donor for your community center. That was me." Grace's eyes widened. "What?" "I wanted to support your dream, but I was too afraid to tell you it was me. I've been making changes to the company, trying to become the kind of leader you talked about, the kind of man who deserves someone like you. You've been... What? All the improvements in our department, the new policies, the equipment. I did that because you showed me what good leadership could look like. You've been teaching me how to run my own company." Grace stared at him, processing this revelation. So the man who fell in love with my dreams was also the man with the power to make them come true? Yes. And I want to give you more than money, Grace. I want to give you the community center you envisioned, but I want to build it with you. As partners. I want to learn from you how to create something that actually matters. Grace felt her resolve wavering. This was the man who had listened to her dreams, who had supported her work, who had made her feel seen and valued in ways she had never experienced. The same man who had the power to change everything. "Arthur," she said softly, "you broke my trust. How do I know you won't break my heart?" Arthur stepped closer, his eyes intense with sincerity. "Because I'm not the same man who called employees hamsters on television. You changed me, Grace. You made me want to be worthy of you, and I'll spend every day of my life trying to become that man." Grace looked into his eyes, the same green eyes that had captivated her as Artie Sullivan, now belonging to Arthur Pemberton, but somehow still the same man who had fumbled through ordering coffees and listened to her dreams with genuine wonder. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Completely crazy," Arthur agreed. "I'm a customer service representative and you're a billionaire. You're the smartest person I've ever met, and I'm a businessman who forgot what business was supposed to be about until you reminded me." Grace felt herself smiling despite everything. This is like something out of a movie. The best movies always are a little crazy. As Arthur reached for her hand, Grace realized that love wasn't about perfect circumstances or matching tax brackets. It was about finding someone who made you want to be better, who saw potential where others saw problems, who was brave enough to change. "Arthur Pemberton," she said, intertwining her fingers with his, "you have a lot of making up to do." "I have the rest of my life to do it," he replied, pulling her close. As they kissed in the doorway of her small apartment, Arthur realized that he had finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not just success, but significance. Not just wealth, but worth. And Grace realized that sometimes the most important transformations happen not when someone becomes who you need them to be, but when they inspire you to become who you're meant to be. 1 year later, the Martinez Pemberton Community Center was everything Grace had dreamed of and more. Located in the heart of her old neighborhood, it buzzed with activity, job training programs, small business incubators, child care services, and a cafe that served both the community and as a training ground for aspiring entrepreneurs. Grace, now Director of Community Development for Pemberton Industries, a position Arthur had created specifically for her, split her time between the corporate office and the community center, implementing programs that connected the company's resources with neighborhood needs. Arthur had transformed Pemberton Industries into a model of conscious capitalism, with employee satisfaction scores that were the envy of the business world. He still worked from the penthouse but spent at least 1 day a week on the floor with employees, never wanting to lose touch with the human reality of business again. "Mrs. Chen, your English classes are going wonderfully," Grace said, reviewing progress reports in her office at the community center. And I hear your daughter just got accepted to college with our scholarship program. Mrs. Chen, beaming with pride, nodded enthusiastically. She wants to study business like Mr. Arthur. She says she wants to help people the way you both helped us. After Mrs. Chen left, Arthur appeared in Grace's doorway with 2 cups of coffee, perfectly ordered from the center's cafe. "How's the most beautiful community developer in the city?" he asked, setting her coffee on her desk and stealing a kiss. "Charming as always, Mr. Pemberton. How's the reformed corporate overlord?" "Learning something new every day from his brilliant girlfriend." Arthur settled into the chair across from her desk. "Speaking of which, I have something for you." Arthur pulled out a small velvet box and Grace's heart stopped. "Arthur, Grace Martinez, you saved me from myself and taught me what it means to build something meaningful. You turned a selfish businessman into someone who understands that real success is measured in lives changed, dreams fulfilled, and communities strengthened." Arthur opened the box to reveal a ring that was beautiful but not ostentatious, elegant but not excessive. "Will you marry me and continue teaching me how to be the man you see in me?" Grace looked at the ring, then at Arthur's face, the same face that had charmed her as Artie Sullivan and now belonged to the man who had become her true partner in every sense of the word. "Yes," she said, laughing through happy tears. "But I have one condition. Anything. No more secret identities. I like you exactly as you are." Arthur slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms. "Deal. Though I have to say the Artie Sullivan experience taught me something important." "What's that?" "Sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find out who you really are." As they kissed in the office of the community center they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of dreams made real and lives transformed, Arthur and Grace knew they had found something rarer than wealth or success. They had found love that made them both better people, and a partnership that would change the world, one community at a time. And if their story seemed too good to be true, too romantic to be real, too perfect to be possible, well, sometimes the best love stories are the ones that remind us that fairy tales can come true, especially when they're built on honesty, trust, and the courage to become who we're meant to be. The end.